Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name's Bryony and I am one half of the Indecisive Readers. Today I am here to do my November wrap up. I read a total of 7 books in November, ranging from 2.5 to 5 stars. My favourite book was The Song Rising by Samantha Shannon, and my least favourite was Vox by Christina Dalcher. The Song Rising is the 3rd book in the Bone Season series, which is a series where being clairvoyant is illegal, but there are a lot of clairvoyants. Paige Mahoney is part of a gang of clairvoyants who use their abilities to go and commit crime to get money and stuff. And in the first one, she's kidnapped and taken to a secret place that shouldn't exist, and then stuff happens, and you can't really say a lot more without spoiling the first 2, or spoiling the rest of the first one, and then obviously stuff happens in the second one, and then stuff happens in this one. So yeah, this is the 3rd book of the series. I read the first 2, I think, in June and July. And I didn't dislike them, but I didn't love them. I'd read The Priory of the Orange Tree back in June as well, and I read The Bone Season that same month. And I think because I loved Priory so much, I wasn't disappointed by The Bone Season, but it just wasn't Priory, if that makes sense. I enjoyed Priory so much, and so saying I was disappointed would be wrong, but I just didn't love it as much. I then read The Mime Order the next month and was probably just still caught up in the Priory-ness. But I haven't read that for a while. I am still obsessed with it, but I haven't read it for a while, so we got a break this time. I've waited like a few months to read this, not on purpose, but I just waited a few months. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I rated this as highly as I did Priory, and I should actually probably say why I enjoyed it. I think my favourite thing about this was it just felt immense. The world building was incredible. It was just so big. Like, the previous 2 books have kind of been localised to one bit of London, but this one included London and then a secret part of London and Edinburgh and Manchester and Ireland, and it just meant it wasn't small anymore. It has become this big thing, and that's going to be something that happens in the next book. It's suddenly a massive thing that exists, and you could just tell the amount of work she'd put into creating it. It wasn't just the places, it was also different people and different abilities, and yeah, you just suddenly got an insight into the world as a whole. By seeing more characters, you got to see more clairvoyant abilities. It's not just Pages and the people in the gang. It's all these other mime lords and mime queens with different abilities, and people around the place that aren't to be trusted but also are to be trusted. There's no one that you are certain about, so that was well done. You also get more interactions with the Rephaim, so these otherworldly creatures, and on a sort of related note to them, I feel like I enjoyed the book more because I understand what they were like. I'm now going to tell you something that you may laugh at me at, because if you know these books you'll know I'm being ridiculous. But basically, I thought the Rephaim looked like this. Some green alien creature, because I knew they were otherworldly, so in my head they were aliens, but they're not quite aliens, they look like humans. And it was just really jarring to me to think that they looked green. So now I understand that they look like humans. It kind of makes more sense for me. The relationships are less weird. Their fitting in with human society is less strange, because in my head there were green aliens walking around London trying to disguise themselves, and that just didn't work. So I think I enjoyed the book more because I understood that, and also because I kind of understood how a series works. I know it sounds silly, but the books I've read recently have been like a trilogy or something, so more stuff happens in those books. Other books in big series I've read recently are books I already know, so I know what the big event at the end is going to be. And in the previous 2 of these books, I think I expected the big event to happen earlier, so then there was going to be a second big event, which is what happens in the smaller books. So now I kind of went into this one was like, right, okay, that's the big event that will happen at the end, and then I wasn't disappointed when it didn't happen earlier. Everything was building up to that, and that worked better for me anyway. The final thing I want to talk about with this is Warden and Paige's relationship. I know a lot of people really like it, and I just kind of didn't have any feeling towards it before now, and so I still possibly don't, but I like Paige's character. I know Samantha Shannon said she was demisexual recently, and as I will discuss in a minute, that's something that really resonates with me. And so seeing that in a character in a book I really enjoy was quite good. And also it's not she's demisexual but she is in a relationship. I mean, she sort of is, but she's not certain of it, and it's growing and it's changing, and it's good. I like it. I rated it 5 stars. The next book I read this month was Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. This book is about Frances, who's in her first year of sixth form, so she's thinking about applying for university, and she's just thinking about university. That is her one goal. But behind the scenes, she's actually really interested in a fandom, and she gets a lot more involved with it, but breaks the trust of someone who's in it by doing that. I kind of I enjoyed this, but I didn't love it, and I don't know why. I think I just didn't quite get along with Alice Oseman's voice, but there were a lot of things in it that I did like, but I can't kind of pinpoint anything down. I felt it was really relatable. There are lots of things that resonate with me, like I went to a grammar school like Frances does. I think she goes to a grammar school anyway, but a school that really pushed you to get the best grades and kind of prioritise your grades over you, and pushed you to apply to Cambridge and Oxford, even though it may not have been best for you or what you wanted. They just wanted to be able to say, yes, we've had 5 students who got interviews for Oxford. And I felt that in this. There's a lot of pushy schools and having to achieve certain things, and I get that. But what I liked more was the talk about relationships in this. I knew it had demisexual rep in it, and I wanted to read this because I think I identify as demisexual. It's something that I'm still coming to terms with. I want to do a blog post about it because I don't think I've got my head around it, or at least what it means to me. And so it's kind of an ongoing process. Like, there are some things that I think of and I'm like, you know what, that actually makes sense for that. But I will put it in a blog post eventually. I want to read a few more books where I can talk about demisexuality, and so I'm saving it until then, but I could have just done it with this. But I think that's why I have a lot of problems with romance in books, and because I just don't relate to it. I don't immediately fall in love, and so seeing it represented in here was good. It's good for, because it's young adult, it's good for other people coming to that realisation, because I mean, I didn't know until my first year of uni, and like I said, I'm still learning it. But I kind of thought it would be more prominent, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's good that it doesn't have to be a central thing, that your sexuality doesn't define you, it is just part of you. But I kind of wanted it to be more of it. The relationship I preferred in this was Aled and Frances's, because it's not romantic, and I think she says that really early on, that this is a story about a girl and a boy, but we don't fall in love. I want to get this clear straight away. And so I enjoyed that, because there's a bit where Frances's mum says to her, do you like him? And she's like, yeah, I like him. He's like, but more than just like him. And she's like, why are you asking me this? And I felt that, because whenever I used to talk about a guy in class, mum would be like, so you like him? And I'm like, no, I'm just talking about him because he sat next to me and something funny happened. So I really related to that and I enjoyed it. I just don't think I loved the writing style. So I rated it 3.5 stars. I read the next 4 books kind of at the same time. I started one, and then I started another, and then I started another, and then I started another, because I kept thinking I want this one done so I can give it back to someone, but it didn't happen. They all took me forever to finish. But the first one I finished was Vox by Christina Dalcher, and as I've already said, I didn't like this book. I rated it 2.5 stars. The premise of it is a patriarchal society where women can't talk or are limited to 100 words a day. They have like a wristband on where it counts how many words they do, and if they go over 100 it keeps shocking them. So it's based in a society where women are silent, have no voice. But the reason why I didn't like this book was because that wasn't really a problem. This massive issue with the book wasn't really an issue, it was more like a background plot device. It's kind of spoilery for me to say, but the main character Jean doesn't actually wear the wrist counter for most of the book. It kind of comes off, and she's just, the plot is driven by the fear of her having it put back on, but it could have been really interested if it was narrated by someone who couldn't talk, but that wasn't a problem. It was also never really explored beyond that few families. It wasn't an issue elsewhere in the world, so you'd feel like other people from around the world would be like, no, this is wrong, you need to stop this, America. Whereas it just kind of existed and that was okay. Or at least that's what I understood from it. But that was my problem. We didn't know, or it wasn't clear. And then it was over quickly. I think from the initial wristbands being put on to the wristbands coming off, I think took about a year, and that was just really quick. You don't have time. I'm not saying it's an issue. I would like the wristbands to only have lasted for a year if I was in that world, but you don't get how it actually affects society. It may be more interested if it was from a woman 30 years after it started who had never spoken or had only ever spoken 100 words a day. So whose language was limited by society's rules. But instead it was this woman who was whining the whole time. I mean, like I said, I understand why she was whining, but she was just, I didn't like her as a character. I thought she was really ungrateful. She did some terrible things and I didn't like her for it. And also she was pretty useless. Feminism isn't about being equal to men, but this book could have happened without her. There was no reason for this woman to be part of a project because the men did all the work, really. The ending was also really rushed and unjustified and also a bit convenient. I didn't quite understand what happened, and then something else happened at the end that just made everything a bit easier for her to sort out. The next book I read in November was The House with Chicken Legs by Sophie Anderson. This book tells the story of Marinka, who lives in a house with chicken legs, which means that every few days, every few weeks, every few months, it moves to somewhere new to guide the dead. Marinka is a young girl who is training her whole life to be a yoga, but something goes wrong and her whole life is turned upside down. The November/December theme for Myth Take Reads is Slavic folklore, and we're not given a particular book, but I saw Ashley was reading this and it looked really interesting, so I thought I'd read it as well. It was really cute. It's a middle grade book. It's definitely for young kids, but it was quite charming and nice, and the illustrations were really, really pretty. And just, so there was some that took up the whole page like this, where they had stars and planets and things, and then I thought I'd easily come up with another one. Okay, there were a lot of illustrations, also some small ones like that, and they were just quite cute and charming and I liked them, but the actual descriptions in this were pretty beautiful as well. It was an insight into folklore that I didn't know about or didn't have any history with. And so getting to see that, I suppose in a children's book was probably better because it was like an introduction to it. So if I wanted to seek it out in other ways, I could. But it was also a good book for dealing with relationships of family and friends. Marinka doesn't get the chance to form a lot of friendships. And so the ones she gets, she maybe exploits is the wrong word, but she kind of uses them for herself sometimes. She doesn't always realise what's best. She gets the chance to be friends with some people that aren't that great, and so she realises after a while that they're not good, but it's a learning curve for her to realise that. But also it's about family, and within that, grief. The book obviously deals with a lot of death, but Marinka doesn't necessarily have a personal connection to that at first. She just watches these people who have died every night. When she has to deal with it, it's a shock to her and she doesn't quite know how to do it, and that's where a lot of the problems arise. So it would be really good for children who need to deal with grief, or to introduce them to that, I suppose. I rated this one 3.5 stars. The next book I read in November was North Child by Edith Pattou. I was at my friend's house during the month and she had this, and I was like, oh, I've heard about that. She said, take it, you'll like it, and I did like it, but I just didn't love it, which I suppose isn't a problem. Research of this book after having read it tells me it's a retelling of a fairy tale, something like To the East of the Sun and the West of the Moon, something around that. It's something mentioned in this, but I didn't realise it was actually something. So there's a lot of folklore and mythology told in this, and it was really interesting to see it all woven together. I think it's lots of different cultures and times and characters, and they're all really well woven together in this, and lots of different magical creatures as well. I haven't actually said what this is about. It's about a family where superstition is rife, and the mother believes that the way you have your child, like which direction you're facing, makes the child a certain way, and so she avoids having a north child because that north child will wander and get into danger, but then she accidentally has one because the sun moves. And so this follows this girl, Rose, as she tries to save her family by going off with a white bear. One bit I really liked about it was the birth directions. I thought that was a really interesting concept that I suppose I'd never heard of. I think because it's part of a fairy tale I hadn't heard of. I just wasn't quite sure of it. There's nothing that makes me dislike it, but nothing that's standing out to me as amazing. Time seemed to pass really weirdly in it. It would spend days doing one things and then months would pass within a few pages, so I wasn't quite sure what to think of it, but that wasn't bad. It was just probably it would have been repetitive if it was stretched out, like she was travelling across a wasteland for ages and that actually took 2 months or something, but it felt more like 2 weeks. But I think that's because she was stuck in a cave for ages. I also would have preferred the chapters to be longer. There were some chapters that were just a page long or something, and one of the characters didn't speak a lot, but when he spoke it was like that, and I just felt like it was weird because I just felt like it could have been told differently. I think it would have been really interesting if Neddy had narrated it all and told it like a story. Like, he wrapped the book up in that way, but I think it would have been more interesting if it was all told in his way. But I liked it. I liked the characters and the romance. I liked the characters and the mythology and the magic and the stories. I don't know what I felt about the romance. I feel like my general feeling towards the book was just okay. So I did enjoy it, but I didn't love it, and so I only rated it 3 stars. The final 2 books I have to talk about, I technically finished in December, but I only had about 20 minutes of each book left to finish. I was just really, really tired, so didn't finish them within November, but I probably could have done if I tried. And so I'm including them in this wrap up because probably by the time December comes around I will have forgotten otherwise. So the first one I finished was We Hunt the Flame by Hafsah Faizal. This is about 2 characters, one called Zafira, who goes into the woods to hunt for her people, but she goes dressed as a man because you can't be a woman in this world. And the other character is Nasir, who is the prince of the world but also an assassin, and he's notorious for killing everyone, but Zafira is notorious in her own ways for saving everyone. This is a world where magic used to exist but doesn't exist anymore, and the two set off on a mission to return magic. The world in this was really rich. You could tell that it had been mapped out really well, but it wasn't telling us everything at once. It would kind of feed us bits of information when we were allowed it. So it would be, oh, here is one person who knows everything and he's going to tell us a bit more, but not quite tell us enough. And you understand why characters like Zafira would get annoyed, because everyone else seemed to know but she didn't, and so having that withheld from her must have been really frustrating. Often when information was revealed, it was kind of done in a, look, here's a shocking bit of information. And also it was a new world to me, so having it revealed gradually was probably better. It sounds weird to say, but I quite enjoyed the women not being a big part of the culture, that they had to fight to get where they were, and the way it was handled was really well done. I think I mostly enjoyed the characters in this. There were some I liked more, some I kind of was indifferent to, but I liked all their interactions together. I knew there was going to be a romance in it because there is a guy and there is a girl, and they're not going to like each other, but they're going to be in close proximity to each other for the whole book, so obviously they are going to like each other. And I kind of felt indifferent to it. Like, I didn't like that it was there, but I think the way it was developed made me think I couldn't hate it, because it wasn't sudden. It didn't really happen until the end, and it happened at the end with everything else. Everything was kind of squeezed into the end. All this drama, all the fighting, all the big revelations happened within the last few pages, probably like the last 100 pages. There were fights and stuff before, but all the big drama happened at the end. And I probably may pick up the sequel, but I didn't pick up this one. I took it from when I went on my work experience. But I think it's not a problem, it's my problem. But my problem with it was I read The City of Brass earlier this year and really enjoyed it, and it just felt very similar to it. I think because I didn't know a lot about either cultures, the fact that the two cultures were quite similar, they had similar mythology and folklore, seeing both and having dual perspective and having the characters sort of fall in love was kind of just a bit jarring and repetitive, but that was on me. And I'm not holding it against it. It's just something that when I was reading it, I was like, oh, we're having this again. We're having these characters again. But I rated this one 4 stars. The final book I read in November was The Switch by Beth O'Leary. This book I got on NetGalley, and I was so excited because I loved Beth O'Leary's The Flat Share earlier this year. And so I suppose that observation is a apology in advance for loving Flatshare so much, and so obviously going into this one with high expectations. But yes, I got granted it on NetGalley, and it doesn't come out until April, and usually I try and wait a bit, so I'm reading them closer to the release date, but I couldn't resist reading this one early, so here we go. The Switch follows Eileen, who is a grandmother in Hampshire, and Lena, her granddaughter, who lives in London. Both are unhappy with where and the world in which they live, and so they both decide to switch for 2 months and live each other's lives. I really enjoyed this book from the go. It's easy to read, the characters were good. I wanted to immediately pass this to my nan, but I can't because it's only on my Kindle. I wanted to immediately pass it to my nan though, because my nan is one of my best friends, and so I was like, she might enjoy this too. But I can't imagine her doing all the things that Eileen does. But it was a really cute, feel-good book. Beth O'Leary writes good, feel-good, happy books, and I think this was definitely one. Although weirdly, it deals with a not happy theme. A lot of what it deals with is grief and coming to terms with grief. The grief isn't new, it's something that happened about a year ago, but Lena is still dealing with it, and so is Eileen, but in a different way. And I think this book shows that there's no one way to grieve. All the different ways of grieving are valid, and there are stages you have to go through with grief, and I've been lucky enough not to have to deal with it yet, but you could see it was a very close, unexpected death, and you could see how that was affecting the family and the relationships within the family. Like, the whole dynamic was fraught because no one quite knew what to do with each other. They were all stepping on eggshells and didn't know what to do. But the rest of the book was very happy. The relationships were nice. It was all about forming relationships. There are people within every community where you have initial thoughts and you never stray from them, and this book challenges us to step away from them and encourages us to look at things in a new light. It also briefly deals with abusive relationships again. That's a big thing about Flatshare, and it also features LGBT plus characters. The main characters aren't, so we'd like some more of that in the future. There is definitely a central, prominently featured character who is LGBT plus. I thought I wasn't going to like the romance in this one, and there were lots of romances, if that makes sense, but I knew it was going to happen, and it wasn't the same kind of romance as was in Flatshare, where the two are allowed to fall in love with each other, but this was kind of a will they, won't they shouldn't, but they might. But where I thought they would, they didn't. So it wasn't as expected. I mean, the romance I expected to happen did happen, but it didn't happen in the way I expected it to happen. And I was nervous going into it because the relationship I knew would break down was a long distance one, and I don't want a long distance one to break down because I am in one, but it didn't break down because it was long distance. I think it just broke down because the guy was a dick. But anyway, I rated this one 4 stars. So there you go. There are some of the books I read in November. Let me know if you've read any of these as well. I know a lot of people will be reading The Song Rising soon because that's the final book for the bonathon, and the next book will come out at some point. But yeah, let me know if you've read any of these and enjoyed them, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!